fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Knight, at Falcoholic Kevin, joined today by a very special guest and friend of the show, Aaron Freeman, at FalcFans, host of the Locked On Falcons podcast. Aaron, how we doing?
I'm doing good, man. It's good that we're finally post-draft. You know, we can get all these takes off, about the actual Falcon players as opposed to the hypothetical Falcon players. So it's a long process, but now we're here.
Yes. I'm glad that we're, out of the woods in terms of these ridiculous, scenarios like, oh, the Falcons are going to trade the 8th overall pick for Ryan Tannehill, so I'm glad we don't have to discuss that anymore.
I'm sure that we'll have a couple of trade rumors, let's call them, over the next couple of months. Once, I don't know, some backup quarterback becomes available, gets cut, and so this is probably not the end of these wonky trade rumors, but we'll see what comes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, if you wanted it to, to stick, like at least be like, oh, the Falcons were going to send, unnamed compensation for Ryan Tannehill. But when you say the 8th overall pick, it's like, come on, guys. Like Arthur Smith loves Ryan Tannehill, but come on, let's be reasonable. He's going to send 2 first-round picks for Tannehill if we're going to be realistic. So, but we're here to talk about the draft class that actually happened, like Aaron said. So we're going to talk about the 6 picks the Falcons made. Maybe get into a little UDFA talk if there's anyone that's caught Aaron's eye in terms of the guys Falcons brought in. Before we dive into those takes, we bring you a quick word from our sponsor today, betonline.ag, your number one source for all your sports betting needs, including info, stats, news, and scores. You can get the latest odds and lines for this year's NBA playoffs, or you can bet on NFL futures, including the Falcons to win the NFC South, or perhaps the NFC Championship, or perhaps the Super Bowl if you're just really, out there. But, hey, scared money don't make none, right? I'm not recommending that you place these bets, by the way. Just to, this is on you. But no matter what you decide to do, folks, BetOnline is always your sports information headquarters this season, as they have you covered for all your sports wagering needs, whether that's basketball, MLB, NHL hockey, all the way to UFC and boxing. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games you can play right from your home. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE, which is BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, Aaron, you want to kick this thing off with our Bijan talk? Because, I mean, you started the Bijan train, but, I like to think I was right behind you. So should we be taking credit for this, or?
Absolutely. I thought we would only have to take credit for the odds changing, but now we have to take credit for the actual pick, right? It was you, me, Eric, Everett. It was a whole bunch of people that very quickly, Adnan got quickly on the Bijan train. So we didn't have to do a whole lot of selling here in the Falcoholic community and in the Falcoholic adjacent community. So yes, I will take full credit for being in Terry Fontenot's head with the Bijan Robinson selection. It always made sense purely from the, best player available. And there was little doubt that Bijan Robinson was one of the best players in this draft class. And there was almost a guarantee that he would be on the board at 8, although we heard some rumors that the Lions were interested in taking him at 6 before they moved back. So it worked out for the Falcons. In the end, they get one of the top players. I think arguably, or at least I would argue, the second most talented non-quarterback in this draft class after Jalen Carter. And I know the selection of Bijan Robinson over Jalen Carter, let's say bothered some local fans. But you get it. I would have loved Jalen Carter, but at the same time, Bijan Robinson's probably the safer investment that high in the draft. Given, some of the off-field concerns with Jalen Carter, the maturity issues that people have raised over the last several months with him. Those are non-issues for Bijan Robinson. He's going to be an impact player right away for the Atlanta Falcons and, really just lean hard on that run-first mentality here in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think it's sort of underrated that maybe the best thing for Jalen Carter too is for him to just not be in Georgia anymore. Like to get a fresh start elsewhere. I think that's an underrated thing for him. I think this may end up being just a smart decision for everyone involved. But we talked about it. Like, would the Falcons even have Carter on their board, given outside of the Deshaun Watson stuff, which we won't really talk about that today. But it outside of that, they've been pretty careful about who they've brought in, like, consistently. So it seemed to me that either Jalen Carter would go before the Falcons, or if he was there when the Falcons were picking, that he'd probably not be on their board, because I don't see how the Seahawks could pass if that they don't seem to usually care about that stuff. So that's what I was thinking. But on the topic of Bijan specifically, I think he's well worth the 8th overall pick. We saw the Lions sort of panic with Devon Witherspoon gone. I am curious now that what we know with them, aggressively targeting Jahmyr Gibbs just a few picks later, if Bijan really was on their radar there. It seems like that was the case, and it's easy to see why. Bijan's a great player. We've talked about him a lot on here. I do think the opportunity for him to be used, in an LT sort of Marshall Faulk role where you're utilizing his talent as a receiver a lot as well as the running, I think would be really smart. We've talked about how, athletically, he and Deebo Samuel, very, very similar players. Obviously, Samuel more of a receiver that runs the ball, and Deebo's a running back who catches passes. But, I think the potential is there for them to utilize Bijan in that unique way, make him one of the focal points of the offense. And I think it's sort of underrated now that you do have 3 sort of pillars of your offense that you can lean on and force defenses to try to account for, with Kyle Pitts, who hopefully with Ritter can take off this year, that he did not manage to do with Marcus Mariota. I think I blame Mariota far more than Pitts, but some people, think Kyle Pitts is a bum. Couldn't be me. So we also got Drake London, who showed instant chemistry with Ritter, and even, was able to have some success with Mariota, which really should tell you how good he is. And sorry, Mariota's just catching all the strays today.
He really is.
Poor guy.
Really
He's on the Eagles. He's fine. He's fine.
He's fine.
But,
he'll be just fine
okay.
in Philadelphia.
Mariota will be okay. But yeah, I do. I love the pick. I know you love the pick, and I'm excited. I'm so excited to see what it looks like, because it's just so much fun. And number 7, I mean, let's go ahead and measure him for the Hall of Fame jacket at this point. Number 7. So I mean, I'm buying that immediately, just because 7's my favorite number anyway. But so now I know that he's going to be an All-Pro. There's no question in my mind. As you know, the jersey number is the most important decision for NFL players. So, second pick, it's an offensive lineman, Matthew Bergeron, a guy that Adnan and I actually predicted on our live mock, which was great. That was the only pick other than Bijan that we got right. And it makes a lot of sense. It does seem like the plan is for him to play guard, even though he played left and right tackle in college. At the Senior Bowl, you were there as well. You saw him. I think we talked about Bergeron being one of the more impressive offensive linemen in attendance. They did play him at guard some. He held up well, but going to the NFL, sort of a different beast. But considering the competition, seems to be the heavy favorite for that job, and obviously nasty, has a lot of the traits you like. So what do you think about Bergeron's pick at 38?
Yeah, I didn't really factor Bergeron too much into the Falcons' second-round targets, because I figured he'd be gone by that point. We heard rumors that the Cowboys were seriously considering him at the back end of round 1, and I told Will McFadden the other day, it's like, if the Cowboys are picking an offensive lineman, that is as good a selling point on a player, because they basically haven't missed on an offensive lineman in like a decade when it comes to drafting those guys. So if you were skeptical of Matthew Bergeron, this is probably the one time you would take Jerry Jones's advice on something, in terms of liking a player. So I think Bergeron, you're right, is probably going to be the day 1 starter at the left guard. I think we've seen Falcon rookies have up and down rookie seasons on the offensive line. You go back to like Jake Matthews and Sam Baker and Lindstrom dealing with injuries, or, just having up and down seasons. Obviously, Jalen Mayfield and Caleb McGarry didn't have the world's greatest rookie season. So I wouldn't go into it expecting Bergeron to have, this like really great rookie season like a Creed Humphrey or anything, although no one will complain about that type of performance if he does wind up having that. But I think there will be a learning curve for him, but I do hope that he has this, I do think he has the skill set to make the adjustment to the guard position and turn into, a Justin Blaylock, John Asamoah type of starter that can, play the better part of a decade here in Atlanta and solidify that left guard spot, which we just really haven't had stability at really since, Blaylock, departed the team, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 9 years ago. Wow. So, I think Bergeron can really solidify that spot. And I think what this move potentially does, if Bergeron winds up doing that, you'll get the stability on the offensive line that we just haven't had the last couple of years. And when you look at the Falcons' recent success over the last, 15, 20 years, it's almost always been those years early in Matt Ryan's career where they basically had the same starting five his first 3 years in the NFL. You had it when Dan Quinn took over, where they had basically the same starting five, except for, swapping out Chris Chester for Wes Schweitzer from 2016 to 2017. But they basically had the same starting five in those years, with Alex Mack coming in for a couple of years there. And so having that stability on the offensive line, I think, will do wonders, not only for Desmond Ridder, but, potentially whoever else the Falcons bring in at the quarterback position, if, that is not Desmond Ridder as the answer over the next couple of years. So I think this is a great move that can really set up this team for a lot of success in the near future.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's sort of underrated. I think a lot of fans weren't really paying attention to Bergeron. Like you said, if you ran mock drafts, he typically is gone before 44. So not a guy that was typically on the radar of a lot of people. A lot of people evaluated him as a tackle also. And I think a lot of Falcons fans were like, well, they re-signed McGarry. They're not going to go after a tackle. I do quickly want to get your thoughts on, do you think the tackle versatility was something that they coveted? Because, another guy that was there was John Michael Schmitz, who I was a big fan of. I think you were a little bit lower on Schmitz than I was, but, they did have, Schmitz had the center versatility, obviously. Well, probably was a starting center. Whereas Bergeron has more of the tackle versatility. Do you think that was meaningful for them, and that maybe they want some long-term tackle insurance as well?
Well, I was lower on Schmitz just based off his college film, and then he went to the Senior Bowl and was arguably the best offensive lineman there. So any concerns I had about him sort of went away after that point where he was that good that week. I think the tackle versatility is valuable because I think the Falcons don't really have great depth there right now, but I don't necessarily see a scenario where the Falcons are playing Bergeron at tackle in the future. I just think, it's a possibility, certainly, but you have Jake Matthews and Kaleb McGarry pretty much locked up for the next 2 years. And I would expect that by that point, Bergeron will be settling in at the guard position, and you'll just be looking for a replacement tackle for those guys potentially in 3 or more years, rather than trying to reshuffle the offensive line at that point. But, speaking of Bergeron's tackle versatility, going back to the Senior Bowl stuff, I thought he held up really well, because that was a legit question for me watching his film at Syracuse. Is he going to be a tackle? Is he going to be a guard? And I thought he held up really well in practice as a tackle. And I was like, oh, he's going to be a tackle. And that was part of the reason why I did not expect him to be there at 44, because there was just so many tackle needy teams in this draft that, could definitely use them. I think I was consistently mocking him to the Steelers at 32 because I had them taking Joey Porter Jr. at 17. They wound up trading up for Broderick Jones and then taking Joey Porter Jr. at 32. So I was on the right track. It was switching the players, basically.
Yeah, that pick connection is strong. So, I understand. But, I think you're probably right there. A part of me wonders if there's a sort of Elgton Jenkins pathway in his future where he gets put at tackle to cover for injury and then is great, and then they're like, oh well, we're gonna keep him at tackle now. like goodbye, whoever he replaced. But yeah, it's funny because I think people really sort of, I guess. The word I'm trying to say is people treat Jake Matthews like he's an inch from retirement because he's been here forever. So I get it, but it's Jake Matthews is 31, guys. Calm down. Tackles routinely played at 35, 36. So I wouldn't, be itching to like replace Jake Matthews unless something like happens. But McGarry, they did just re-sign him. They have some flexibility, I think, after year 2 if they wanted to get out of that deal. But at this point, I think he's sort of penciled in to be the clear left guard of the future. But his tackle versatility is valuable because, look, I do wonder, because Jermaine Ifedi going to be the swing tackle seems pretty clear at this point based on their moves. But you do wonder, like, if on a game day, if they have multiple tackle injuries, is Bergeron the emergency tackle then? Like, does he then kick out to tackle and they put one of the other guys at guard? He's good and he's really smart, right? So I wouldn't rule out anything for him. But yeah, I think left guard is the place to mitigate some of his weaknesses, or especially early on. But I'm just excited to have an Orangeman, in Atlanta. So we got to get those Cuse guys. We were close to Garrett Williams, but just went a little too early. So, but yeah, 3rd round pick Zach Harrison, the edge rusher from Ohio State. I don't think we ever really talked about him, so I'm curious your thoughts on Zach Harrison.
Yeah, Harrison was always kind of the player that I was like, well, if they don't get a better edge rusher in the first couple of rounds, like a Tyree Wilson in round 1 or a Keon White in round 2, by the time we get to like round 3 or 4, I could see them taking a Zach Harrison as basically like a consolation prize. So I didn't give Harrison a lot of thought throughout this process. I saw the tools and the skill set, and I'm like, this is intriguing. This is a player that typically gets drafted in the top 100 year after year. And I don't see a lot of these guys turning into impact NFL players, but I feel like Harrison probably is better than I initially gave him credit for. And I think given the presence of Ryan Nielsen here, that he has a better chance than maybe other players of similar body type, these sort of, classic, I can't remember who I heard talking about it. Maybe it was like Nate Tice or Robert Mays or somebody like that. But they basically, someone on a podcast over the last couple of weeks was basically saying, and I think they were talking about Tyree Wilson or Miles Murphy, I think. And they were talking about, I know, now I remember, I'm sorry. I'm just going through, it was Deontay Lee on the Athletic podcast.
Yeah.
And he was basically talking about like, when he was talking about Miles Murphy, these 6'5", 275-pound defensive ends have been in vogue in the NFL for like 40 years. And there's a reason for that. And for that reason, I expect Zach Harrison, to be a solid NFL player. It's just a question of, does he live up to the hype more in the NFL than he had at Ohio State, where he was a highly rated recruit. I think the top recruit over guys like Garrett Wilson when he showed up on campus. And, given Ohio State's recent history of being able to produce high level NFL players, I wonder if maybe they were a little bit left wanting by him not necessarily living up to the Chase Young, Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa lineage in that regard. But I certainly could see a scenario where, his best football is ahead of him and he winds up, being a much better NFL player than maybe he was a college player.
Yeah, you wonder, because you're right. Like, I remember reading stuff about him years ago where it's like, oh, the next, Chase Young, the next Bosa brother, this is the next guy in the pipeline, Zach Harrison, And like, that's a lot of pressure, obviously, for someone coming out of high school. And you look at his stats, like, his pressure numbers are actually really good, but the sacks just weren't there. So there's certainly something there. Like, he's someone who's creating pressure, but just not finishing. So maybe that's coachable, right? Maybe that's something you can coach up. But even if he's just a high level pressure player at the NFL level, the Falcons have guys that can finish. Like Arnold Ebiketie, that was one of his specialties in college. He cleaned up a lot of plays because he's so, he's got that bend, he's explosive, he's really good in pursuit. And Zach Harrison, I think people think he's super raw. I think as a pass rusher, he's certainly got work to do, but as a run defender, he's ready. He can play. So I'm curious, like, how early he gets active on game days, because the pass rushing is still a work in progress, but the natural talent's there. His ability as a run defender is there. But the Falcons have so many edge rushers now on the roster. They're like, I have them keeping 6 in my roster projection, which is a lot of edge rushers to keep. That's how many they have. That's how many I think they're going to have to keep. But I sort of wonder how early he gets on the field. But maybe he's just a long-term Calais Campbell successor. Maybe he's the Calais Campbell backup in case, God forbid, Campbell misses any time. But I think it's a really intriguing one. And yeah, it's like, if you can't get Tyree Wilson, you can't get Miles Murphy. Like, Zach Harrison has those similar traits, but he's only going to cost a 3rd-round pick. So I think the value here was appropriate for Harrison. And this is Ryan Nielsen's chance. Like, show us you were known for doing this in New Orleans. Now bring it here to Atlanta, where we've been notorious for not doing this. So
yeah.
Let's see what happens. I'm excited to see what he could turn into. Next pick, maybe my favorite one. Clark Phillips III at corner, guy that was getting mocked in the 1st round early in the offseason, ended up falling into the 2nd round mostly, after he measured in a little bit, under what he was listed. College teams like to lie, folks, but it is what it is, right? But yeah, I'm curious what you think about the Clark Phillips pick. I think it's one of my favorite ones in this class.
Yeah, for similar things I said about some of the earlier picks, I wasn't really putting him on the Falcons radar. Like, I had him on the Falcons radar very early in the process when he was being mocked as a late 1st, early 2nd round guy. And I'm like, okay, with Dean Pease in the building, like that's a Dean Pease corner, right? With Clark Phillips, smart, tough, plays big for his size. That's the type of guy that Dean Pease is going to want on the outside. And then we hired Ryan Nielsen. I'm like, okay, well, looking at the Saints, they tend to like, bigger, more athletic, longer guys. So maybe Clark Phillips is not in the mix. And, conversations we had, Kevin, in the weeks prior to the draft, sort of thinking, okay, corner's probably going to wait until like the 3rd or 4th round. And by that point, Clark Phillips is going to be gone, right?
Yeah.
And so like, he, even though he'd be a good, addition to the nickel, and I thought that was probably the direction that the Falcons would want to go with, someone who had that ability to play inside as opposed to outside, given the Jeff Okudah trade. Clark Phillips wasn't necessarily a guy that I was factoring in as a future Falcon, because I just figured he would be gone. And then the fact that he fell to the 4th round due to the height, the length, the lack of speed. And we know that corners, with the exception of Christian Gonzalez, he seems to be the exception, that we know like corners tend to get drafted higher, the taller, the faster, and the longer they are. And those are just boxes that Clark Phillips is never going to check, but he more than makes up for it in the other areas with the instincts and the toughness and the technique and all those various things that you want to see from corners, rather than just basically being these big, long athletes that you have to coach up. So I think Clark Phillips is going to be a guy that can come in right away and win that nickel cornerback job. I think he and D. Alford and potentially Mike Hughes are that's going to be one of the probably most compelling camp battles this summer. And I think, as they often say, iron sharpens iron. And I think, the whoever emerges as that competition, should be a pretty solid nickel cornerbacks. So, anybody that was, a little bit disheartened to see Isaiah Oliver walk, I feel like the Falcons have, brought in enough talent, particularly with Clark Phillips, to feel pretty good about, filling in those shoes. And so it would not shock me at all that Clark Phillips, is the week 1 starter at that nickel cornerback spot. And in fact, I think I did a recent depth chart on Locked On Falcons, and I had him, number 1 at that spot with the depth chart at this point in time. So I'm eager to see what he does in camp later this summer.
Yeah, with Phillips, it's like he just hasn't really played a lot of slot. He was basically an outside exclusive corner at Utah, which makes sense when he's, the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year, consensus All-American. I mean, he held up against guys like Drake London, who has obviously like a 5-6 inch height advantage over him. He held up against Jordan Addison, your guy. He did not shy away from NFL caliber, 1st round NFL caliber talent, and he held up against those guys. And that he apparently, by all accounts, just eats, breathes, sleeps football. I think there was, what was it they were saying in the press conference was like, oh yeah, before we even got off the phone, he was like, okay, so when's the playbook coming? It's like, bro, like have a drink or something. Like it's okay, like it's okay to celebrate, but just a guy I think fans are going to love. I think it was one of the best value picks in this draft. Not just for the Falcons, but for any team. And I do wonder, like, is this a guy, like, it doesn't happen often. Every once in a while you get, some short kings on the outside, like DJ Reed. So I do wonder if there's a slight chance that he could be the next DJ Reed, who's just a 5'9" corner who defies all expectations and just is an outside corner. Very similar measurables to Reed. I think Phillips has 1 inch shorter arms or something like that. So it's a little bit shorter arms, but physical. I know people were like, "Oh, is he big enough to hold up and run support?" Watch his tape and you tell me if he can't hold up and run support, because he's a good run support player, like he just is. And 185 at 5'9" is thick too. Like you think about that, it's like, oh, that's kind of small. 5'9", no, he's big for that size. So I love Clark Phillips. Yeah, and like you're saying, I would not be shocked if he's a starter by week 1. I think he'll be a starter by week 17. By the end of the year, he'll be starting. So, it may displace UCF legend Mike Hughes from the starting lineup, but it is what it is. Mike Hughes, honestly, a great cornerback 4 as well. So like he can play outside and inside. Maybe he's just your top depth guy. They're not paying him this huge contract where he has to start or you're going to be freaking out. So let the best man win, whether that's Phillips or my boy, Mike Hughes. But I think the depth of this cornerback room just improved so much with Clark Phillips that it's hard to dislike that selection in any way. It's just, I think that's one of the more impact selections, especially this season for the team. We got 2 7th rounders. DeMarco Helms, probably the one that's more immediately interesting in terms of the roster. Curious your thoughts on Helms coming in here, the safety out of Alabama.
Well, I know I like these 2 players a lot more than you, because I know how much you hate 7th round picks due to having to do the live stream.
Nothing personal.
Just on principle, you just hate 7th round picks. I like the Helms pick a lot. I didn't pay a ton of attention to him at Alabama because he was kind of overshadowed by Brian Branch and Jordan Battle. But going back and watching, I like, he's a guy that's going to thump you, right? He seems to want to mix it up, come downhill, play the run. Sort of a classic cover 3 strong safety, even if he isn't necessarily had the sort of size that you ideally want at that position, being what 6'1", 205, somewhere around there. But he there's a lot of his game. I'm not saying he's going to be this player, but like there's like a Keanu Neal light version of him, kind of in terms of how he wants to mix it up, and wasn't the world's greatest deep safety. But coming from that Alabama system, he's been well coached and he's disciplined and all that stuff. So like I think he'll be able to function in that regard. But you saw in that Tennessee game where he got matched up 1-on-1 with Jalen Hyde a couple of times, and it was not a good look. So it's like, you want to keep him away from like Chris Olave, in terms of 1-on-1 coverages, and he'll be just fine. But I like the Helms pick mostly because like he brings a different style of play at that safety position. Jesse Bates is more of a deep safety. Richie Grant can kind of do it all. We saw Richie Grant probably be a little bit more reliable and consistent when he was playing closer to the line of scrimmage than he was in the deep half of the field, but has that versatility. And I think Helms is just a more of that enforcer, that thumper type that I think will be a good combination with those 2 guys. And I feel like, with Jalen Hawkins entering his contract year, this is probably the writing on the wall that the Falcons aren't necessarily going to bend over backwards to re-sign Jalen Hawkins, or at least give them an insurance policy in the event that, Jalen Hawkins doesn't have a great final year here in Atlanta and they do decide to move on from him, and they have Helms who can potentially slot in as that 3rd safety in dime looks or big nickel type of stuff and be more of that enforcer, but also give you a guy that can be a contributor on special teams. That was something he did at Alabama. The Jovan Gwynn selection was a little surprising just because I didn't think the Falcons would go for another center guard type of player. And, given his size limitations, probably is going to be a center exclusively. I haven't really done a deep dive on this film yet. But apparently, Dwayne Ledford kind of fell in love with him. That's kind of the story on him, doing some coaching clinic down in South Carolina, and was like, this is the guy. And so the Falcons are like, Ledford loves this guy. And so,
go for it.
And so like, look, I'm not going to bash anybody that Dwayne Ledford loves. That man, as I've told you, Kevin, like, his stock is as high as any human being in the city of Atlanta at this point in time, given what he did last year for this offensive line, going from basically one of the worst offensive lines of football to one of the best offensive lines of football. So if we need to draft Jovan Gwynn to keep Dwayne Ledford happy, then I'll take it. And again, it's similarly to the Jalen Hawkins conversation. It does make you wonder a little bit about Matt Hennessy's future here in Atlanta, especially if, Matthew Bergeron winds up, taking that left guard spot. And, Hennessy is great depth because of that versatility. And so maybe the Falcons pencil Jovan Gwynn sort of as that guy in the future. But I think given how many guards and centers the Falcons have right now on their roster that, like they've invested resources in, like Jalen Mayfield and Justin Schaefer and Matt Hennessy, I do wonder a little bit if Gwynn is a great bet to make the roster. But again, if he's a Ledford guy, then, he might, stick because, the tie goes to I was going to use a bad baseball analogy, but you guys get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So like we'll see how that goes. So I'm definitely interested to do a deeper dive on his film because I basically only watched like one game of his against Georgia, and he was fine in that game and just didn't stand out in any major way, didn't struggle or was poor or anything. Just like, yeah, he's fine. And so I'll be curious to watch some of his better performances from the SEC this past year to sort of see. And I think the theme with Helms and Gwynn is like, rather than taking a swing on upside, some, high RAS score player that came from a Division II school in the late rounds, you just take, hey, these guys were very productive at the highest level of competition in the SEC. And, those seem to probably be better bets in round 7 than necessarily taking the high upside athlete. So I like these picks just purely as like 7th round picks. These tend to be a little bit better than the typical 7th round picks of the Falcons have taken in round 6 and 7. I'm just like, all right, like, yeah, he'll be in camp. I don't know if he's going to make the team. But I like these bets a little bit better than that.
Yeah. TD had that legendary like Russell Gage, Foye Oluokun like day 3, but other than that, it was pretty much, other than Kamal Ishmael, who I was going to bring up when talking about DeMarco Helms a little bit. But yeah, I mean, on that topic, like I that's sort of how I view Helms a little bit. I think, Helms has a little bit more versatility in terms of where you can play him. Kamal Ishmael was just more of that classic strong safety, but Helms even has a little bit more size than Ishmael did. So that's nice and ran a little bit faster. So I do think Helms does have a really strong chance to make the roster. And if you got a 7th round pick that's you're putting in and it's like, this guy has a really good chance to make the roster, that's a good 7th round pick. So I really like that addition. I think he's a high floor player and safety depth, can play multiple spots. Even, you don't want him matched up on wide receivers necessarily, maybe some of the bigger guys, but tight ends, I think he did pretty well against, especially. The Falcons don't really have that tight end specialist right now, so maybe Helms can fill that role. But very physical, gonna bring the boom. And you love that. And then, yeah, with Gwynn, it's like, I like Gwynn. I just wonder, like, is this guy gonna make the roster? It's really crowded, but if they love him and you watch a little bit of his tape, but it's like, he looks pretty clean. He doesn't look tiny compared to the other offensive linemen, even though he is just a hair under 6'2" and a little under 300 pounds. But, at the NFL level, those issues will be magnified, and he might just be a center only guy. And if he is, then can you really carry him on the roster as a backup if he's just a center? So he'll probably have to prove that he can play guard as well. But, feisty, 2 or 3 year team captain, wouldn't bet against him necessarily, but yeah, it's that one I think is he's got a tougher path to the roster for sure than Helms, who doesn't really have a lot of guys in front of him that you're like, well, he's going to have a tough time with this guy. Nope. I think Helms, you could probably pencil him in. So, interesting class though. Before we take off, any of the UDFAs that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, Keelan Harris, the Oklahoma Baptist receiver, and I only mentioned him because I was talking to him with Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio before the draft and had him on to talk about some of the wide receiver prospects, and he rattled off a bunch of names, including Keelan Harris, and I had never heard of Keelan Harris, so I went and looked him up, and I was like, okay, this Oklahoma Baptist guy that Matt mentioned, and then I watched a couple of highlights. Apparently, he had a really good week at the NFLPA Bowl. And like I just recall Matt Waldman, hyping up Olamide Zaccheaus back in like 2018 as like one of his guys, and so I'm like, okay, well, if Matt Waldman likes him, I don't know, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. That's worked out pretty well with another 5'9", UDFA that was just killing folks. I don't even know what division Oklahoma Baptist is, like
D2,
Division 3.
yeah.
It's D2.
D2,
Okay,
yeah.
all right. NAIA or whatever,
Yeah.
D3. But like I saw some of his highlights and he was just wrecking dudes. And it feels like the Falcons get one of these guys every year, one of these D2 receivers that we put a little bit of hype on. I can't remember the guy from was it like Tennessee Tech? Not Chris Rowland, but somebody else. A couple of years ago that we were like, oh, this guy's going to be good, and he didn't do anything. But so I'm hoping that he's more Olamide Zaccheaus than whoever that guy was. But just because Matt Waldman, mentioned him, I'm like, okay, that he's intriguing based off of that.
Yeah, I know everyone's really hyped about Justin Marshall, who definitely like looks the most like an Arthur Smith receiver of anybody in this group. But yeah, another D2 guy who coincidentally played against Keelan Harris in the same conference is Xavier Malone, who was the one that wasn't reported before the team announced the signings. He's 5'7.5", 182. So, there's that. But he ran an official 4.36 at the pro day, but apparently has been timed in the mid to low 4.2s. And yeah, if you want to watch comical tape, just watch Xavier Malone at Henderson State. This is his stats real quick. 67 catches for 1,382 yards. So that's almost 20 yards per reception, 15 touchdowns. And he also threw a touchdown on a trick play. So, hey, legend. Anyone with the last name Malone, I feel like is good. With D'Angelo Malone coming in, I thought he was pretty good too. So, if they want more of a speed guy, he's that. I think Keelan Harris has some interesting versatility there too. And then, Justin Marshall, if they just want another Arthur Smith receiver, then they could go that route. So it really just depends. And then we obviously got Penny Hart signed today or last week or sometime, day or night. He was brought in. So that one's interesting too. But yeah, I think a lot of people were surprised that there wasn't more emphasis on this wide receiver group. I know we talked about it a lot. So were you surprised by that they didn't really get a wide receiver?
Yeah, I mean, when they didn't get one in round 4, I was like, yeah, it's probably going to be, I don't know if you're drafting a 7th round receiver that's going to really do anything at that point. Maybe you stumble upon the next, Antonio Brown. It was a 6th round pick or something like that, but the history isn't great for like 7th round receivers. So it was kind of like, okay, well, we're back on the Corey Davis trade, right? We're just waiting for Corey Davis to get cut or to get traded or whatever. So I do think the Falcons will probably address the wide receiver at some point in the next 6 months, whether it's, in the coming weeks, like they did last year with trading for Bryan Edwards, whether that's, if Corey Davis is a June 1st cut by the Jets or something like that, or a training camp trade. I'm still holding out hope for, Hunter Renfrow, as a slot king here to make, what you loved about Olamide Zaccheaus, just dial it up 10 times, and that's a Hunter Renfrow. So I do feel like the Falcons at some point will address that wide receiver position. They'll just kind of bide their time and try to get some value at that spot between now and, the Halloween trade deadline. So I'm expecting something to happen. I just don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah, we're officially on hashtag Corey Davis watch still. But they did just sign Randall Cobb, the Jets. So
yeah,
are they really keeping this man at $11 million to be their wide receiver 4? Like, are they seriously going to do that? I just don't believe it.
I think they're going to probably try to bring him to camp so they can maximize the trade value. Hopefully someone will come a calling, and then they'll just dump him for pennies, at some point later this summer.
I just don't think anybody's trading for that contract. It's too much. Yeah. It's like, so, and they save almost all of it with a cut. So it's just like, are you guys really going to play this game? I think the Falcons are patient. I think they're like, we're going to wait this out. Like, this is going to happen.
I mean, it's similar kind of the Deion Jones situation last year, where it's like no one wants that contract, and the Falcons are like, we'll just hold on to him so he doesn't go to the Saints, and we'll eventually trade him at some point. So I think that's maybe the Jets are trying to hope the market will eventually come for Corey Davis. We'll see.
Yep, but I think it's like Arthur Smith probably wants him more than anybody else, and I don't think he's willing to trade for him. So I'm curious if anyone else is, but that would be a perfect addition if we could make that happen. So we'll remain on hashtag Corey Davis watch until it happens. But I've been saying this all offseason, so I just need this to happen just for me at this point. So whatever, however it occurs, I'll be ready to celebrate. Corey Davis. But Aaron, really appreciate your time, guys. He is Aaron Freeman at Falc Fans, host of the Locked On Falcons podcast. Anything else you want to plug, man?
Nope.
Cool, short and sweet. I like it. Friend of the show, Aaron Freeman, obviously at this point as well. So,
I should plug. I am working on a Desmond Ritter article for the Falcoholics. So
an article.
Yes, I might write something for like the first time in like 4 months for the Falcoholic.
Well, that is worthy of plugging for sure. That is big news, breaking news. I need the Chiron for that. But yeah, guys, thank you for tuning in. I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin. Please do like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave us that 5-star review on your podcast of choice. Follow the show at Falcoholic Live on Twitter. You can support us on Patreon if you're so inclined. Patreon.com/Falcoholic Live for those exclusive perks, mostly ad-free episodes, and also some exclusive stuff, right? And yeah, want to thank our sponsor again. The show's presented by Bet Online. Yeah, guys, we'll be back next time on Dirty Birds and Brews with some more Falcons content. Until then, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Join the community Discord as well. Links in the show description. Until next time, guys, have a great day.